Good evening, everyone. At this hour, the Senate is wrapping up a third day of confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Once again, Republicans focused on dog whistle politics and, frankly, offensive false insinuations about her record, with Lindsey Graham and others resorting to interrupting, mansplaining, and outright bullying. Through it all, Judge Jackson showed patience and resolve in defending her record. And we're going to have all the news from the hearing coming up shortly. But we begin the readout tonight with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's humiliation on the battlefield as Russia's war on Ukraine enters its second month tomorrow. NATO now estimates that 7,000 to 15,000 Russian troops have been killed in Ukraine. That's according to a NATO official who spoke to NBC News. And if you include the Russian troops who've been injured, captured, or gone missing, the number could be as high as 30,000 to 40,000. Russian forces remain bogged down and stalled out along the front lines, which have barely advanced in a week. They continue to be repelled by Ukraine's more nimble fighting force, which has repeatedly managed to outmaneuver them despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Meanwhile, the Russian military cannot even meet the basic needs of their own soldiers. Western officials say Putin's forces are facing serious shortages of food, fuel, and cold weather gear, and some are now suffering frostbite. Many soldiers were never told where they were going or what they were fighting for. Some units even abandoned their vehicles and equipment. In fact, their losses are now so significant, they may have lost their ability to keep up the fight. The New York Times reports that, according to the Pentagon, Russia's combat power in Ukraine has dipped below 90% of its original force. Such heavy losses can leave units unable to carry out combat duties, according to U.S. officials. It comes as Ukrainian forces report that they have retaken a key town outside of Kyiv, part of a broader counteroffensive to drive back the invaders on multiple fronts. Additionally, Ukraine says it's claimed the lives of at least 6 Russian generals. And experts say that mounting toll could soon erode Russia's military effectiveness. The discontent among Russian troops was captured in an intercepted phone call released today by Ukraine's security forces. Complaining about the operation, one Russian soldier says even Chechnya was better. At least it was clear. It's just BS here. Our own plane dropped a bomb on us. This is madness, he says. Now we are circled. They fire at us from all directions. All of this reveals the staggering miscalculation by Putin, who reportedly believed Ukraine would collapse without a fight. Now, the New York Times is reporting that the slow going and the heavy toll of Putin's war are setting off questions about his military's planning capability. Their lack of progress is so apparent that a blame game has begun among some Russian supporters of the war. As a former Russian intelligence colonel said on Monday, Russia had made a catastrophically incorrect assessment of Ukraine's forces. Bloomberg also reports that an advisor to Putin has stepped down and left the country, citing his opposition to the war in Ukraine, according to 2 people familiar with the situation. This comes as Western sanctions cripple Russia's economy, prompting runs on basic consumer staples like sugar, which is in such short supply that scenes like this one have reportedly played out in numerous grocery stores across that country. And after being closed for more than 3 weeks, the Russian stock market is set to partially reopen tomorrow, though foreigners are barred from trading and short selling has been prohibited. Joining me now is former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, who is the Vice President of Russia and Europe for the U.S. Institute of Peace, and Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and MSNBC Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst, with whom I'd like to begin. General Stavridis, this sounds like a full-scale disaster, and it's one that I wonder if, in your view, just looking at it strategically, did Putin look at what happened in Afghanistan, where the government collapsed immediately, and the Taliban, with very little in terms of strategic ability, was able to just take over that country, take over the capital? Was he lulled into a false sense of security by that or something else? Because it seems like he was warned. This is from the New York Times. In January, according to the New York Times, the head of a group serving and retired Russian military officers declared that invading Ukraine would be pointless and extremely dangerous. It would kill thousands, he said, make Russians and Ukrainians enemies for life, risk a war with NATO, and threaten the existence of Russia itself as a state. Can you explain, from your expert point of view, how Putin could have gotten this so wrong?
He got it wrong because he has spent 20 years isolating himself from the leadership just below him. They're scared to death of him. And you see it every time one of these faux conferences are held. Putin sits at this long table. It looks like a gondola from Venice, and his minions are arrayed at the other end, kind of responding to it. They're afraid to give him the bad news. And by the way, let me just draw a line under something you said, Joy, in the excellent summary you provided. 7 to 15,000 dead Russians. Let's call it 10,000, I think is actually conservative. But that's many more than the U.S. suffered, killed in action in both Iraq and Afghanistan in 20 years. They've lost many more than that in the last 4 weeks. And so I think this is catastrophic for Vladimir Putin. Where it goes next, we'll have to wait and see what happens in terms of the responses. But certainly this is a disaster. And I'll close with this. But, you know, admirals love nothing better than to criticize generals. This is bad generalship. His generals have failed and failed badly, and there will be consequences in his inner circle, I predict.
And Admiral, I think I said general in regard to you, so I apologize for that. I like to give everyone their correct bona fides because you've certainly earned them. I have to stay with you for just one moment, because given that the gross miscalculation on his part militarily, and the fact that they've been unable to even hold cities that they've taken, that they're unable to resupply, that essentially their troops are stuck and in some cases starving and freezing. How, in your view, does this end? How do we get past this stalemate? Because the Ukrainian forces are obviously doing a superior job, but there's still a genocide taking place against civilians, which now officially the U.S. has said it's war crimes. How does this end?
It is war crimes. And what has happened is Putin has gone from plan A, blitzkrieg, decapitate the Ukrainian government, probably literally. That's failed. Plan B is 15th century warfare. It's encircled these cities and pound them down. And how does it end, Joy? In the end, it'll probably conclude with a negotiation of some kind. Certainly, Putin is not going to just give up and leave Ukraine. That has to be negotiated. That is coming, I'd say, in 2 months or so, as he really bleeds dry and his forces lose their combat effectiveness.
And, you know, Admiral Taylor, in that time, a lot of Ukrainians are likely going to die because, you know, as the Admiral has said, I mean, at this point, it is a Russian military war against civilians while their own troops are just sort of flagging, right? And so in that 2 months, you're going to have a lot of death, a lot of destruction. Is there anything more that, in your view, NATO can do? President Biden is headed there. He's going to be talking with NATO. They're going to be meeting. It's a very quickly put together meeting. Is there anything that NATO can do short of joining what feels like World War III?
Joy, NATO can increase the flow of weapons. The Ukrainian military, as you've said, as Admiral Stavridis said, they're fighting heroically and with great vigor. And they are spending a lot of their weapons. They are shooting a lot of their ammunition. They need more. They need more of all of the kinds of weapons that we've been talking about over the last month. And the other thing that they can do is tighten the noose of sanctions. You showed how the Russian economy is already hurting. It needs to hurt more. There needs to be more people who are feeling that. So both of those things, Joy, can happen in this trip that President Biden is on to Brussels and on to Poland.
And we know that President Zelensky is going to also address the NATO summit tomorrow, so that is going to happen. We're going to be watching for that. I want to stay with you for a moment, Mr. Ambassador, because so we know that the crackdown is intensifying inside of Russia on dissent, on protesters, tens of thousands of people being arrested. The chief political opponent, Alexei Navalny, now sentenced to 9 additional years in prison. You know, he's using sort of a fear campaign internally inside of the country while their country's being starved economically. It feels like sort of there's nowhere else for Putin to go but gone. Do you get a sense, just looking at it from the outside looking in, that Putin's reign is becoming unstable?
Joy, is possible. I wouldn't say it's likely. I would say it is possible. You quoted a letter from senior retired military earlier on. Part of the letter that was not in your excerpt there raised exactly that issue that you're talking about. That is, these generals, and this one lead general said, Mr. President Putin, you could jeopardize your own regime. You could have destabilization. You could have, he even said the word uprising. So there are concerns, Joy, among generals who are at that point recommending, demanding, pleading with President Putin not to invade because they thought it might destabilize his own regime. So yes, it could happen. Sad to say it's probably unlikely.